Let's start by understanding what absolutism really means. Absolutism was a political system that emerged in Europe, especially during the 16th and 17th centuries. In this system, the king or monarch claimed to have absolute or total power over the state and its people. The idea was that the king's authority came directly from God, a concept known as the divine right of kings. This meant that the monarch was not subject to any earthly authority, including parliaments or laws made by others. But was this power truly unlimited? Let's explore further. Absolutism didn't appear overnight. Its roots can be traced back to the decline of feudalism and the rise of centralized states in Europe. As kings consolidated their territories, they sought to strengthen their own authority and reduce the power of the nobility. The chaos of religious wars and political instability also pushed people to seek strong leadership. Monarchs like Louis XIV of France became symbols of this new centralized power. But how did they justify their authority? Let's take a closer look at the divine right of kings. Divine right of kings was a powerful idea. Monarchs claimed that their right to rule was given by God, making them answerable only to him. This belief made it difficult for anyone to challenge the king's authority, since opposing the king was seen as opposing God's will. This concept was especially popular in France and England, where kings used it to justify their actions and maintain control. However, not everyone accepted this idea, and resistance began to grow over time. One of the most famous absolute monarchs was Louis XIV of France, also known as the Sun King. He ruled for over 70 years and is often considered the best example of absolutism in action. Louis XIV centralized power in his own hands, controlled the nobility, and built the magnificent Palace of Versailles to showcase his authority. He famously declared, "I am the state," emphasizing his belief in his own absolute power. But even Louis XIV faced challenges and limits to his rule. Despite their claims, absolute monarchs did not have unlimited power. They depended on the support of the nobility, the church, and wealthy merchants. If these groups withdrew their support, the king's authority could be threatened. Additionally, economic problems, wars, and popular uprisings often forced monarchs to make compromises, so while kings had more power than ever before, they were not truly all-powerful. Nobles played a crucial role in the absolutist system. While kings tried to centralize power, they still relied on the nobility to govern provinces, collect taxes, and maintain order. In return, nobles enjoyed privileges and wealth. However, if the king pushed too hard, nobles could rebel or undermine his authority. This delicate balance shaped the politics of absolutist states. The relationship between the church and the monarchy was complex. On one hand, the church often supported the king, reinforcing his divine right to rule. On the other, the church had its own interests and could challenge royal authority if their goals conflicted. In some countries like France, the king managed to control the church, while in others, such as England, conflicts between church and crown led to major political changes. Economic strength was essential for maintaining absolute power. Monarchs needed money to fund their courts, armies, and projects like palaces. They often taxed the population heavily, which sometimes led to unrest. Economic crises such as poor harvests or war debts could weaken the king's position and force him to seek help from other groups, reducing his independence. England's experience with absolutism was different from France. English kings like James I and Charles I tried to rule as absolute monarchs, but they faced strong opposition from Parliament. This conflict eventually led to the English Civil War and the execution of Charles I. Afterward, the monarchy was restored, but with clear limits on royal power. This marked the beginning of constitutional monarchy in England. Spain also saw the rise of absolutism, especially under kings like Philip II. Spanish monarchs centralized authority and expanded their empire overseas. However, constant wars and economic troubles weakened their power. The Spanish nobility and regional governments retained significant influence, showing that even in Spain, royal power had its limits. In Russia, absolutism took a unique form. Tsars like Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great centralized power and modernized the state. They reduced the influence of the nobility and church, bringing all authority under the crown. However, the vast size of Russia and resistance from traditional elites meant that even the czars had to negotiate and compromise at times. Russia became known for its efficient and disciplined absolutist state. Kings like Frederick William I built a strong army and bureaucracy, making Prussia a major European power. The monarchy worked closely with the nobility, known as Junkers, who helped administer the state. This partnership was key to Prussia's success, but it also meant that royal power was not entirely unchecked. Absolute monarchs used symbols to display their power. Crowns, thrones, and grand palaces like Versailles were designed to impress and remind everyone of the king's authority. Ceremonies, rituals, and portraits reinforced the image of the monarch as a powerful and almost divine figure. These symbols played a key role in maintaining the king's image and legitimacy. While absolute monarchs claimed to be above the law in practice, they often had to respect certain traditions and legal customs. Laws and courts existed, and ignoring them completely could lead to unrest or rebellion. Some kings issued new laws called edicts to strengthen their control, but they still needed to maintain a sense of justice to keep their subjects loyal. War was a constant feature of absolutist rule. Monarchs needed large armies to defend their territories and expand their influence. Wars were expensive and often led to higher taxes and economic strain. Victories could strengthen the king's position, but defeats could undermine his authority and lead to unrest. Not everyone accepted absolute rule. Peasants, townspeople, and even nobles sometimes resisted the king's authority. Uprisings, protests, and revolts were common, especially when taxes were high or rights were threatened. These movements sometimes forced monarchs to make concessions or even step down. In the 18th century, new ideas from the Enlightenment began to challenge absolutism. Philosophers like John Locke and Montesquieu argued for limited government, separation of powers, and the rights of individuals. These ideas spread quickly and inspired people to question the legitimacy of absolute monarchy, setting the stage for major political changes. Absolute monarchs were great patrons of the arts. They sponsored painters, musicians, and architects to create works that glorified their reign. The arts became a tool for propaganda, helping to shape public opinion and reinforce the king's image as a powerful and cultured leader. Women played important roles in absolutist courts, often as queens, advisors, or influential figures behind the scenes. While they rarely held formal power, their influence could shape decisions, alliances, and even policies. Some queens, like Catherine the Great of Russia, became rulers in their own right, showing that power in absolutist states was not always limited to men. Absolutist monarchs were often involved in overseas expansion and colonization. They claimed new lands, established colonies, and extracted wealth to fund their courts and armies. Colonization brought great riches, but also led to conflicts, exploitation, and resistance from colonized peoples. Justice under absolutism was often harsh and served to reinforce royal authority. Kings appointed judges and controlled the courts, using justice as a tool to maintain order. However, unfair or arbitrary decisions could lead to resentment and undermine the king's legitimacy. Religion was both a source of support and conflict for absolute monarchs. While many kings used religion to justify their rule, religious minorities often faced persecution. In some cases, religious conflicts weakened royal authority and led to wars or reforms. For ordinary people, absolutism meant living under strict rules and heavy taxes. The king's decisions could affect everything from food prices to religious practices. While some benefited from stability and order, others suffered from oppression and poverty. Life under absolutism was often a mix of security and hardship. The age of absolutism also saw the rise of science and new discoveries. Some monarchs supported scientists and inventors, hoping to use their knowledge to strengthen the state. However, when scientific ideas challenged traditional beliefs or royal authority, conflicts could arise. Absolute monarchs often controlled the flow of information. They censored books, newspapers, and speeches that criticized the government or challenged royal authority. Censorship helped maintain order, but it also limited freedom of expression and could fuel underground resistance. Diplomacy was an important tool for absolute monarchs. They formed alliances, negotiated treaties, and used marriage to strengthen their positions. Diplomatic successes could enhance a king's prestige, while failures could weaken his authority and invite foreign intervention. By the late 18th century, absolutism began to decline. Economic crises, wars, and the spread of Enlightenment ideas led to revolutions and reforms. In France, the monarchy was overthrown during the French Revolution, and new forms of government emerged across Europe. The age of absolute kings was coming to an end. Absolutism left a lasting legacy. It shaped modern states, influenced political thought, and left behind grand monuments and cultural achievements. While the era of absolute monarchs is over, debates about power, authority, and the role of government continue to this day. Oh, did kings really have total power under absolutism? The answer is complex. While they claimed and exercised more authority than ever before, their power was always limited by social, economic, and political realities. Absolutism was about the appearance of total control, but in practice, kings had to negotiate, compromise, and sometimes even retreat. Absolutism teaches us important lessons about power and its limits. Even the most powerful rulers depended on the support of others and faced challenges from within and outside their kingdoms. Understanding absolutism helps us appreciate the complex relationship between leaders and society and reminds us that no one, not even a king, truly rules alone.